Thanks everybody for coming to this class. Today we will learn about banking and what banks look for in a renewable energy project. So we have Jim Barber with Fifth Third Bank. He will tell you all about the funny name of his bank. And Jim has been wonderful in being available to teach these classes because he is in there in the thick of it and is really helping to bring this industry and make it as it is right now. So, Jim, thanks again, and you have the reins.
All right, thank you. Thank you for having me, and I'm glad to be a part of this. I'm going to start really quickly with a bit about my background and what we've done in the solar space, and then I want to just get a little bit of information about the folks that are on the presentation, so you can either just type that in and just let me know kind of what you do today, what you're hoping to get out of this class, what you hope to be doing in the renewable space in the future. Doesn't have to be a lot of information. I just want to get a feel for what your background is and where your interests lie. So be thinking about that as I start with my introduction. I'm going to start with this one presentation that it's actually an internal presentation, and then I'll switch over to my PowerPoint presentation. But I am the middle market credit officer for really from Virginia to Atlanta for Fifth Third Bank. And the middle market group is a generalist commercial lending group. So most of what we lend to are just general businesses, manufacturing, distribution, but for some reason or another, this group has developed a expertise in the solar industry, and so now all of Fifth Third's solar lending gets underwritten through my group. And so we've been lending into the space for about 4 or 5 years. It took a while to do our first project because we really had to get educated, but now we consider ourselves experts in the space. It's been a great business for us, and it's been a lot of fun to grow as the industry has grown in North Carolina. Most of what we have done are utility scale projects in North Carolina, and most of what we do is construction financing. So a little bit about what we've done to date. You should be able to see on your screen Fifth Third Impact, and just over the course of the 4 or 5 years that we've been in the space, we think we've lent over $1 billion into utility scale projects. Helps finance over 800 megawatts. You'll see some other statistics here, and currently we have about $500 million committed to the industry. So that just gives you a sense for our role in the space. There's even a statistic over here under that through 2013, Fifth Third financed approximately 56% of the projects installed in North Carolina. And today we bank most of the top developers in the state. So with that said, I am going to shut down this presentation and go to my PowerPoint. So just bear with me 1 second. All right, so let me know if you have trouble seeing the presentation. But so I am not going to go into the history of Fifth Third or talk about the bank. I will just tell you, you're probably wondering about the name, and originally the bank was an Ohio-based bank, and there was the Fifth National Bank of Ohio and the Third National Bank of Ohio. They merged, and they didn't want to be 3/5 because it was during Prohibition, I believe, and they thought that name would mean that, would connotate 3/5 of liquor. so they wanted to be Fifth Third Bank. So that's why we have our funny name. So that's enough about us. Now this slide is a little bit dated, and I kind of went over what we've done in the space so far, but this was prepared a couple years ago, and we've grown a lot since then. And I'll just say most of what we do is construction loans. We do some permanent loans as well, and permanent being, when I say permanent, think about like your mortgage. You know, it's a long-term loan that's and the life of the loan is tied to kind of a project that's producing energy. Construction loan is simply providing interim financing until the tax credit equity comes in and the permanent financing comes in. So before I go any further, I wanted to hear from you all in terms of your background. So I will let me just go ahead and read what you guys have written, and if I haven't heard from you, please let me know. So Wayne, you're interested in developing utility level solar farms, and I assume when you say developing, you mean you know, development in terms of, you know, acquiring the land, getting all the right you know, getting it designed, getting the right permits in place, getting financing lined up, dealing with the the contractor as well. If that's not the case, let me know.
Wayne, that I
Roger.
unmuted you so you could talk if you wanted to. No? All right. Sorry.
No worries, and I'm not afraid of awkward silence either. So, let's see, Roger, you are an instructor at STC, licensed electrical contractor, and I'd be curious to know what you, assuming you're teaching, you know, courses in your field, but be curious to know if any of those courses have renewable components to them, or if that's something that, you know, that you'd like to add to your curriculum.
Oh. And Roger, if you have a microphone, or I actually unmuted you, so if you want to answer that, that's fine. Or you could type it in the chat box as well. But you are free to talk. No.
Yeah, I'm just catching up on the comments that you all wrote.
Okay.
Christine, I see you're a mechanical engineer, master's in sustainable energy, looking to get into solar design. Yeah, I'd be curious if that's design of utility scale solar, or if there's a specific niche. Gregory, utility solar construction manager, learning more about other aspects. Okay, great. So Gregory, you are you're currently constructing projects. Is that correct? And
yes, where's Greg?
Greg, I'm
right here. Yeah, and I know Greg I talked to him for a bit, but he was, and you're unmuted, by the way, Greg, so you could just jump in if anytime.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
There you go. We can hear you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've been doing contract construction management for different companies past like 2 years.
Okay. And are you out in the eastern part of the state with a lot of those projects?
Yes. Well, I've been both actually. I've been in the eastern part of the state, and I've also been out west.
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, I would imagine that we're financing a lot of the projects that you're building, and you know, occasionally we'll get out to tour some of those sites. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear more about that, maybe offline.
Sure.
All right. Well, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I said just sure.
Okay. All right. Well, I will keep moving, and I appreciate the feedback you gave me. And please, you know, if you have any questions or want clarification on certain things, please write in the comment box, or you know, if you have a particular interest that you want to focus on, let me know. All right. So, real quick about. I think we talked a little bit about the differences of financing: construction, which is temporary, and then permanent, which is long term. And you can see I have a little bit of definition in there as well. And then lines of credit, which we don't really need to talk about, but those are for kind of the biggest and the best developers. Most of our construction loans they're kind of true project finance, and they have tighter controls over, you know, making sure that the EPC contract's in place, the power purchase agreement's been signed up, all the permitting is in place, just that everything necessary to build that project is in place before we lend money to that project, so that we can eliminate as much risk as possible. But a line of credit would be to a bigger entity that has a lot of established revenue and cash flow and assets that we could, and a proven track record, so that we can rely on that rather and have less controls on the actual project. All right, so I wanted to start off with just a quick lesson in banking, and let me ask, before we get into the 5 C's of credit, I want to ask this question, and this is not I stole this from somebody, but I thought it was really good way to illustrate how we evaluate whether or not we make a loan. So, let's say your cousin Vinny comes to you, and he wants to borrow $20,000 of your hard-earned cash, and let's assume that you have a cousin Vinny, and let's assume that cousin Vinny is a little bit, I don't know, he's a little sketchy. You can ask your cousin Vinny 2 questions. He wants to borrow $20,000. Take a stab at what are the 2 questions you would ask him. And I'll give you a couple minutes to think about that, and would love for you to type your comments into the comment box. And hopefully nobody's offended by my use of cousin Vinny. All right, so Wayne says, "What's your credit score?" All right, Christina says, "When he'll pay you back and how?" Lyra says, "What will you do with the money, and what do you think you'll get back?" Yeah, and Gregory says, "Where's the money coming from to pay it back?" So that's exactly what I wanted to get at is, you know, we have that common sense approach of if somebody came to us and wanted to borrow some of our hard-earned money, we'd say, what do you need it for, and how are you going to pay it back? And so I want you to keep that in mind as we go through some of these cases, because, you know, when you add a lot of details to a potential scenario, you tend to make it more complicated than it needs to be. And it's really a simple question of what are they using the money for and how are they going to pay it back? Now, another way to kind of evaluate a loan request is to filter it through the 5 C's of credit. And this is something that every banker learns in their credit training programs. The 5 C's are essentially character, what type of person are you lending money to? Capacity, meaning how much debt can they handle, how much debt can they repay? Capital, how well capitalized is the business, meaning how much money has the business actually invested in the business, or how much money has the developer invested into the project. Conditions, that's current economic and regulatory conditions that could affect repayment. And collaterals are, when banks lend money, they always take a lien on some type of asset similar to your mortgage, and if you don't make your regular payments, or you can't make your regular payments, they're going to rely on the collateral to take that to try to get repaid. So another way we think about a loan request is, what is our primary source of repayment and what is our secondary source of repayment? And then I've added the 6th C, and I call that compliance. And in that I would include, which is basically regulatory compliance, compliance with all the rules that the federal government has put in place to make sure that we are lending prudently. And I'll just say that those regulations have increased significantly since the Great Recession and since the financial crisis. And so banks are under more and more scrutiny to make sure we're complying with those regulations. There's all sorts of regulatory bodies that look at us. Just to name a few, banks are regulated by different entities, but the OCC, the Fed, FDIC is part of that. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Anytime you're lending to consumers, not necessarily a business purpose loan, they'll look at that. And you probably see in the paper that there's been lots of fines levied against banks. So a lot of these regulatory bodies have the ability to fine banks or to restrict our ability to do business. Tell us that we can't do mergers and acquisitions, or just restrict different business activities like opening new branches or things like that. So just wanted to stress that the regulatory environment is very, very intense, and it's just been increasing over the last 5-6 years. Well, I guess, more like 7 or 8 years. And there's significant consequences if you don't comply with those regulations. And we have a lot of internal staff. Part of what I do as credit officer, the way the banks work is you have your sales guy, and they're trying to sell money, basically, and then you have folks like me who want to make sure that we manage the risk appropriately and that we get repaid, and also that we're following regulations. And then you have other internal auditors, other internal compliance folks that will look over my shoulder and audit my work and tell me whether or not I've made a good decision or structured a loan properly. And then you have your outside regulators. You have the Fed come in and look at the loans you've made, and render decisions on whether or not the bank has been being managed appropriately, and what you can and can't do, and whether or not you should be fined. So I just wanted to give you a little insight into the regulatory environment, because there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just that banks are stodgy, conservative institutions, but we have to comply with a lot of regulations. A lot of that has to do with the fact that our deposits are FDIC insured, and so we're taking your deposits and we're making decisions on how to lend that money out, and the government is ensuring that your deposits are protected. So that's some insight into why, commercial banks are tend to be, very conservative. And then I'd also just ask you to think about different sources of capital. Senior banks are a source of capital. They tend to be the most risk averse, but they also tend to get the lowest return. And then there's a variety of other capital providers that would possibly take up more risk but look for a higher return, all the way down to equity investors. So every business or project has an equity interest who has all the upside of the project. So their return is can be unlimited to a certain extent. All right, so moving on. This gives you a little bit more detail on the 5 C's: character, capacity. We talked about primary source of repayment. We talked about secondary source of repayment, capital, collateral, and compliance. So before we get into the first case, just wanted to recap as you think through these cases. Think about the cousin Vinny test. What do you need that money for, and how are you going to repay me? Think about the 5 C's, and then also think about what is the bank's primary source of repayment, what is the bank's secondary source of repayment, and then lastly, just keep in mind that the bank is a highly regulated institution. It's been entrusted with deposits, and it's supposed to lend those deposits out prudently. And there's other capital available for other sources, and so senior bank debt is not always the right source of capital. Any questions on that before we move into some actual cases? All right. Well, I'm going to quickly go through case 1, and then spend more time on case 2, and you'll see why. But rather than read this case to you, just type in. Let's just go over the facts of the case. So just read it real quickly, and just type me some facts of the case. No need to insert your opinion or analysis. Just let's just regurgitate the facts of the case to make sure that everybody's on the same page here. I got to make sure everybody's still awake. All right, here we go. We got a 9-megawatt solar project. What else? Actual cost is $12.7 million, and that's hard cost and soft cost. And I don't mean to insult anyone, but hard costs are the actual cost of construction, and soft costs are more like developer fees, permit fees, paying the engineers. That's the difference between hard and soft. Let's see what else we got. Yeah. Yeah, Lyra, you said must have been built last year with the state tax credits. That's right. We got federal and state tax credits here. So this was 2015 or before. And yeah, I'm sorry, 14.7 total. 12.7 of hard costs and 2 million of soft costs. Yeah, thank you, Christina. Bank is let's see, Bank has never done a renewable project. That is an important fact. Yeah, see, Big Bank has completed over $1 billion of tax credit investments, but has never invested in a renewable energy project. So that's the difference between Big Bank is going to be the tax credit equity investor, and Fifth Third is going to be the lender. Yeah, thank you, Gregory. The largest project to date is that the developer has done is 250 kilowatts. Yep, Christina, the owner is in weak personal financial condition, and we'll use that term weak on a relative basis because you know, he may look like some of us, but the bottom line is we don't have a personal guarantor that has $500 million of liquidity that could help backstop the loan. Yep, and Lyra makes an important point. They want to go from 250 kilowatts to 9 megawatts. All right, so so we talked about some of those facts, and a lot of those touch on the strengths and weaknesses. But think about the 5 C's: the character, the capacity, the collateral, the capital. And I'm missing one. Capacity, conditions, and just give me your opinion on some of the. Let's start with the strengths of the project. Give me some of the strengths of the project.
And by the way, for those of you who are taking this as a recorded session, take this opportunity to answer it on your own and write it down somewhere so that you remember to do these things and actually answer the question.
Yeah, and also just to emphasize, you're viewing this as a banker. You're Fifth Third Bank, and you could lend them. You're trying to decide whether or not to lend these people $15 million to build their project. Yeah, Gregory, all agreements are in place, the PPA, et cetera. That's critical. Yeah, Wayne, you said shovel ready. That's critical as well. Christina, you said negotiated agreements. Absolutely. And from our perspective, we see that PPA as a critical piece to the puzzle. It's got to be. We don't want to take any risk that Duke Energy might not sign that PPA. Wayne, as you know, there's always a feasibility study involved. So, they do a study with the utility company to see if there's any upgrades to the system that need to occur when they connect this to the grid. There's always a cost for that feasibility study, and as a lender, we don't want to lend them money until we know what that interconnection cost will be. We don't want to. This guy doesn't have an extra $1 million if Duke comes back and says your interconnection cost is actually $1 million or whatever. So and the fact that the PPA agreement is 25 years. That's a long time. It's at a fixed price, and it's with Duke. So banks really like that. Banks really like that long-term, predictable stream of revenue in cash flow. They like the fact that that Duke Energy is on the other side of that. So in terms of the project gets built, our risks are that the sun doesn't shine, or that we have some type of eclipse for the whole year, and Duke doesn't pay. You know, and those are, banks like those two risks. Let's see, other strengths of the project, Gregory. Yeah, term sheet from big bank, tax credit investor. Yeah, that's huge, because our primary source of repayment in this instance is the proceeds from the federal tax credit, or from the federal and state tax credit investment. And we'll talk a little bit more about the need for state in the second case. But as a bank, since we're doing temporary financing, we're looking at, as our primary source of repayment is going to be that tax credit equity investment coming in from big bank. And big bank is a very, very strong institution. So we think that they are good for the money. And we think that our construction loan can get repaid when that tax credit equity money comes in. And just as a reminder, I think you guys have covered this in other courses, but the tax credit equity investor is buying the tax credits. You know, so whoever buys the tax credits to reduce their tax liability, generally it's somebody who's making a lot of money so that they can reduce their tax liability. There's also other benefits to that as well, which I think you've covered in other classes, like bonus depreciation, just other ways for them to reduce their tax liability. Christina, you also said that Bright Sun has no debt. Yeah, so that's a strength. You know, Bright Sun doesn't have a ton of money, but we know they don't have any debt, and that's a positive. All right, let's talk about some of the weaknesses of this deal. I think a couple of you have mentioned that the Bright Sun, the developer's never done a utility scale solar project. So we're going from 250 kilowatts to 9 megawatts, and that's a big jump. So the question is, does Bright Sun really have the capacity, you know, acting as contractor and developer to build this big of a project? All right, what other weaknesses do you see? I know one of you mentioned that the owner of Bright Sun is willing to personally guarantee, but his personal financial condition is weak. So it doesn't sound like he's going to be able to provide additional support to the project if needed. And then Lyra, you mentioned too that there's a first priority lien on the panels until they're paid in full. So until they pay for the panels in full, we don't have collateral. You know, if you look at what the collateral is here, if they own the land, it might be the land. If they own the panels, it would be the panels. There's also racking and posts, but a lot of that doesn't have value. It doesn't have a lot of value. The real value here is the long-term PPA contract with Duke Energy. So, but yeah, that's absolutely an issue that we don't have. The senior lender should have a first priority lien on all of the assets, so they should have a first priority lien on the solar panels. Yes, and then another weakness is that Big Bank has never done a renewable energy project. They have done lots of tax credit equity investment, but they haven't done a renewable energy project. And that's a real life example. You know, this was a couple of years ago, but we had a very strong bank who had done a lot of tax credit equity investment, but had never done a renewable project. And we spent a lot of time with the developer and contractor and bank and tax credit equity investor to hopefully finance their project. And at the end of the day, the big bank just wasn't ready to do a solar tax credit equity deal. So we like to see contractors who have a lot of experience in the space. We like to see developers that have a lot of experience in the space. We like to see strong tax credit equity investors who have experience. And that is a weakness of the deal. All right, so I do want to keep moving. So let's just talk about, because this is a real life example that if you're if you have some experience in the space and you want to take a bigger role, there's a lot of obstacles to overcome going from 250 kilowatts to 9 megawatts. So what could Bright Sun do? Well, actually, hold on. I'm sorry. Let me back up. So we talked about our primary source of repayment is 9.3 plus 5.1, so that's 14.4 of tax credit equity, and they want a $15 million construction loan. Anybody see an issue with giving them $15 million? Yeah, Wayne, 100% financed, and actually, if they're only getting 14.4 million and our loan is 15, they're looking for more than 100% financing. So where is their equity? They haven't put in any equity. So it seems like they're asking for a little too much money here, and that gets to the capacity question, the debt capacity question in our 5 C's of credit. All right, so we talked about strengths, we talked about weaknesses. How can Bright Sun improve their chances of getting this project done and getting the financing they need? Or another way to answer the question, or another way to ask that question, if you're Fifth Third Bank, what could you do here to make this loan more palatable? He's got some experience in space, but probably not enough. The Elijah says, ask for less money or build a smaller project. Yeah, yeah, I absolutely agree. Wayne, yeah, you say hire experienced staff. Absolutely. And one of the things he can do, he's EPC and developer, but he's never built more than 250 kilowatts. So maybe one thing that could help him is if he hires a larger contractor that the bank has dealt with before, and to give the bank more comfort that he can handle this big of a project. So if we can't give him the entire 15 million and he's going to ask for less money, where does he get the rest of the money he needs to get this project done? Because he doesn't have it. And Lyra, you make a great point. He could sell all those agreements, absolutely. You all know probably just as well as I do that there's a ton of projects in queue to be constructed or in the state, and they're at various stages of agreements with landowners, with the utilities, and once they reach that point where they have everything they need to build the project, you could sell that to a larger firm. And we've definitely seen that happen. We've seen the value for developed sites increase. We've seen developers go to great lengths. We have a developer who bought a helicopter for the very reason of being able to go out and try to find good sites So and to acquire that land and to get that development going. So there is real value in those developed sites and those negotiated agreements and those and, having your feasibility study done. So that's absolutely something he could do. Yeah, the drone would help. Yeah, I think he liked. Yeah, absolutely. He did just want the helicopter. I can tell you that for. I can tell you about. I know that for a fact. But he's also given his bankers rides in a helicopter, which is fun. All right, so Wayne, you said I'd like to hear more about the value of those agreements. There's as more and more money has, and Wayne, maybe you and I can talk about this offline, but as more and more money has come into this space, and we've seen, and I don't understand exactly how the queue works, but we know that sometimes it takes a longer and longer period of time to actually get your project done, get your interconnection agreement signed, get the interconnect with Duke or Dominion. So, as you have developers with money wanting to get more projects done, and if they don't have the pipeline for projects to be built, they'll go out and they'll find that smaller developer and they'll buy that developed project, which includes either the land or a long-term land lease. The land has to be permitted properly for solar, and then there has to be they have to be in queue. And I'm not an expert here. I'd have to talk to our legal counsel and do some research, but they have to be in queue with the utility. Hopefully have that feasibility study done so they know what kind of costs that they'll need to incur to upgrade the grid and connect, and then have that PPA agreement. And you guys have probably studied the PPA agreements, but you know that under 5 megawatts there's a set price, the avoided cost rate, and then above 5 megawatts it's a negotiated price. So obviously if you have a big 50 megawatt project and you have a negotiated PPA rate with Duke, and that's going to and it's at a good price, and that's going to be of value to somebody. So there's a lot of work in getting these things shovel ready, and so there's a lot of value in being able to sell shovel ready projects. And we saw one of our smaller developers. He didn't have the capital that some of the larger developers had. He had a good pipeline of projects to be built, but didn't have the resources to build them. And so one of the things he did was he sold a couple sites to generate some cash so that he could get some other projects built. Anyway, so the other thing that Bright Sun could do is bring in an equity investor. He needs to find somebody with some money, and he would have to give up some of his ownership in the project. But one of the lessons of this project is, kind of pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered. You need to walk before you run. It's better to make a little bit less money on this project and be able to get it built and financed so you can go to your next one than to try to hang on to all of the profits, all the returns, and not be able to get it built, not be able to get it financed. So from the bank's perspective, we're going to want to see somebody else who has capital that can back this project, We're going to want to see the loan be a smaller amount. We're going to want to do a lot of diligence around big bank because they've never done a solar deal. So those are some of the lessons from this case. All right, well, I want to move on. Actually, before I move on to case 2, any questions about case 1?
So in real life, Jim, has there been a case like this where Bright Sun actually was able to request 15 million short-term construction loan, or this would be outright kind of like laughable?
You know, this case was taken from a couple different examples, and this request, as is, would be a no. We can't finance you. But and I appreciate you asking that question. But I tried to get at, all right, what could we do to make it financeable? You know, get a more experienced contractor in there, get another equity partner that has capital. And the first project we financed was a fairly small developer, but he already had built some projects that we'd go out and see, and we could see them in production, and so he had a track record. And actually, some community banks had financed those projects. You know, that's another lesson as well, is, you know, when you start out smaller, you know, sometimes the community banks can be a better option.
Oh, and Wayne does have a question. He said, what dollar value of equity would be assigned to make this deal doable?
Yeah, so that's more art than science. I mean, I'll tell you, one of our criteria would be, all right, so we're going to lend, our primary source of repayment is that $14.4 million. We're not going to lend 100% on that $14.4 million. We're probably going to lend 90% because we want to have some margin that if big bank says, hey, you know, this project's not worth as much as we thought, we can only put in this much money, you know, so we have some margin there. So we would do 90%, which would be about $13 million or $13.4 million. Excuse me. Yeah, $13 million. And so if he needs $15 million to get it built, then he at least needs to find another $2 million. And then one of the questions that the banks are going to ask is, all right, what about contingency? So has he, you know, has he built enough contingency into his budget? And if there is a cost overrun or a delay or an unforeseen cost, where is that money coming from? And so maybe he needs a little bit more than $2 million of equity. I'll tell you, as our experience, you know, with our experience in this space, as a lender, we've gotten comfortable in how much these things have cost, and we've gotten confidence in folks in borrowers' ability to budget, and because we've done multiple projects, we know what these things cost. Most of the cost is in the panel, so you can eliminate a lot of the contingency. Yeah, so Wayne, we'd lend 90% of 14.4, so that would be 13. Yes, about $13 million. All right. Any other questions about case 1? All right. So moving on to case 2. All right. So this this was originally written. This case was originally written when we had state tax credits. Now state tax credits have gone away, and so one of the things we want to talk about in this case is just ways to get projects done without state credits. Now, obviously, we've seen costs come down a lot. Cost of panels, efficiency in construction. So the need for capital has come down, and that's helped to eliminate the need for state tax credit equity. So that's been a big help in getting these projects done. And then also want to talk about, with this case, also want to talk about other ways to help get projects done without state tax credit equity. So, and just as you know, there's, we are at that point where we don't need the state tax credit equity anymore. And so we're still seeing robust activity based on the federal tax credits. All right, so let's start again just with some facts. I won't read the case, but just help me regurgitate some of the facts of the case. All right, they have $37 million in federal tax credit investment. And that is from a AAA rated insurance company. So we feel pretty good about the federal tax credit investor. They're putting in $37 million. And just so you know, they put in $37 million after the project's been placed in service. But that $37 million would be our primary source of repayment for a construction loan. No state tax credit investor. Yep, the GIC's financing commitment expires in 9 months, so we got to get this thing built. So we need to make a decision here. We don't have a lot of time to go out and try to find a state investor because we've got to get this thing built. Christina, they've done multiple projects. I'm sorry, that they are multiple projects. Yep. So it's going to be seven different projects totaling 25 megawatts. So they got to manage 7 different sites. Yep, and they've negotiated all of the agreements for the 25 megawatts. That's kind of a deal killer for us if they don't have all those agreements in place. Yes, bigger developers are building these projects. Wayne, and I'll just tell you that the size of projects have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, we see now, we see 40 megawatt projects, we see 50 megawatt projects, we've seen 100 megawatt projects. The sites, we used to see more of folks take a lot of 5 megawatt sites and bundle them together into one kind of coordinated project. Now we're seeing larger sites that have those negotiated PPA agreements rather than the avoided cost rate. And yeah, so Wayne, I think I answered your question. It could be a big project that's made of lots of smaller sites, or we've seen some just huge projects on one site. And just so just another kind of consequence of that is that a lot of these bigger developers, they've done so many projects, and they need so much money that we've reached our limit with a lot of these developers. So, we might have $100 million committed to one developer, but they need several $100 million, and so we've kind of reached our capacity to provide financing for some of those big guys. All right, Christina, you also mentioned prior work or financing with GIC. That's right. GIC's got experience in the space, so we like that. PPA is 15 years, so we want to make sure that. Now, one thing I want to note is the length of the PPA is very important to us, because that's a contracted, predictable revenue stream that we can rely on for the repayment of our debt. We generally, when we amortize our loans, meaning how many years will the loan get repaid, we want that amortization to be inside of that PPA. So if it's a 10-year PPA, we don't want to give them a 15-year amortization. So if it's a 15-year PPA, we generally do a 15-year amortization or a 14.5-year amortization. I will tell you that we are seeing, now, one thing in the back of your head is you're probably thinking, all right, well, these projects they're going to last longer than 15 years. These projects are going to last 25 or more years, so why not give them a 25-year loan? The answer to the question is we don't know what the cash flows will be like once that PPA expires. We don't know if they'll be able to sell energy for a lower rate or a higher rate. They'll probably be able to sell higher, but banks aren't willing to bank on that. We are seeing some banks be willing to give a loan with a longer amortization than the PPA. So we're seeing some banks that would give a 20-year loan on a 15-year PPA. Christina, you ask, so in this project there are three months left, since they already have wasted 6 months looking for an investor. Let me see. I think there were, so they have, GIC's financing commitment is 9 months. So they have 9 more months until that financing commitment expires. Yeah, and I just meant Best Solar has already wasted 6 months trying to find the state tax credit. So the 6 months have gone by, but they still have 9 more months until the financing commitment expires. And they don't think that they can find a state investor to meet the deadline. So in other words, they can't find a state investor. They only have 9 months left. So they should, if they can secure the financing, assuming it takes them a month to 2 months to secure the financing, they'll have 7 to 8 months to build the project. All right. All right. So, any other facts that stick out to you? We got a 25 megawatt project, 7 sites. We got committed tax credit equity for $37 million, just federal, no state. Total cost of the project is $78.5 million, but that's the tax credit basis. The actual cost is $43 million. And so Fifth Third's willing to lend 90% of the tax credit equity that's coming in. So that's 90% of $37 million, which would be 7.4, or sorry, 37 minus 7.4. So let's just call it 30 million to round. So Fifth Third would only lend $30 million against $37 million of tax credits. He needs $43 million to get the project built. So what are his alternatives? Where does he come up with the other $13 million? Christina, all right, so we got $1.3 million in annual net cash flow. All right, so what do we do? What do we do with that? What can we do with that cash flow? Now he's got a $13 million gap. Now hopefully Best Solar can put in, since it's one of the most largest and most successful investors, hopefully it can put in a few $1 million to help bridge that gap. So Wayne says, yeah, all right, what's the current value of $1.3 million in net cash flow? That's exactly what I wanted to get at. And this speaks to what the permanent loan, what kind of permanent loan we could put on this project. In some cases, we'll do construction to permanent. So you would have your construction loan, which would be repaid when the federal tax credit equity comes in, and then you'd have your permanent loan, which would be repaid with the cash flow. Now, normally banks don't like lending based off projections, but this is not a typical business. This is a solar project that has engineering studies and has ran lots of different projections based on 50 years of weather data, and we have conservative estimates, we have less conservative estimates, and we can place some degree of confidence on their ability to produce this electricity and sell it under the PPA. All right, so we need to figure out how much we could lend with $1.3 million in net cash flow. And just so everybody understands, net cash flow would be, you sell your electricity, then you got to pay your O&M, you got to pay your legal fees, your accounting fees, any other expenses, and then you're left with your net cash flow, and that $1.3 million is after those expenses. All right, so I'm going to pull up Excel. Excuse me. Just to do a couple quick calculations. All right, so we got $1.3 million to work with. How much of a loan are we willing to make? Now, Wayne said, what's the current value of the 1.3 million? Well, let's do a quick net present value calculation, and I'm assuming everybody can see my Excel spreadsheet. And this is a whole separate class, and we won't go into all the details, but net present value is basically just valuing the future cash flows. What is the value of those cash flows? Don't ask me where I come up with 8%. That's just kind of there's lots of courses on that as well. And actually, just excuse me for 1 second while I construct a quick spreadsheet. All right, so this first column is going to be years. That's years 1 through 15, and our cash flow is going to be constant. We could change that, but we're just going to say that it's $1.3 million in net cash flow over 15 years. So we want to find what the value is of those cash flows, assuming a cost of capital of 8%. So we're saying the value of those cash flows is $11 million, or that project would be worth $11 million. Anybody have have a problem with my assumptions. Do you agree that that project, once it's built, is only worth $11 million? So Wayne says yes. Good question, Lyra. Does makers get into this? Don't want to go into too much detail, but let's just assume that the value of the tax credits, assuming the value of the depreciation, all goes to the tax credit equity investor. So we've taken that value out of the project, and now we're just looking at the cash flows. Talking just about the cash flows. Yeah, Lyra, good point. At least for the first 5 years, the way that these things work is that after the 5-year vesting period, the ownership structure would typically flip, so the ownership structure would change. We won't get into all that. We'll just stick to the cash flow. So, so what happens after year 15? Does this project just cease to exist? Yep. So yeah, they renegotiate the PPA or sell, but we all think that this project's going to continue to produce electricity. So let's assume that it goes out, it exists for at least another 25 years, and it produces the same amount of cash flow. And let's redo our NPV. Oops. Now we're at 13.8 million. Not too bad. So a little bit of an improvement. And then we could also, let's just say that the electricity rate gets cut in half. So I'll just say 1.3 million times 0.5. That's a rough approximation. So now the value goes down to 12.5. All right, let's say if the utility rate goes up by 150% in year 16, so then the value goes up to 15 million. Yeah, and Wayne's right. The value changes with the discount rate you use, and we won't get into all that, but the higher the discount rate, the lower the value, so 12%. If you use 12%, the value goes down to 10 million. If you use 6 million, the value goes up to 18. So you get a sense for how folks can manipulate the value of these projects. And think of that interest rate that you're using is it's the weighted average cost of capital, or said another way, it's kind of maybe a better barometer to think about that is what kind of return is the investor expecting to make each year, not over the course of the project, but each year. So now that's probably a little bit more into the valuation of these products than what you were looking for, but at least wanted to talk about that a little bit. Now banks are going to value these products very differently than the developer. The developer say, hey, this project's worth $18 million, and actually we think it's going to last 30 years, so we're going to take it out another, let's see, 2, 3, 4, 5, another 5 years, and we think it's going to be worth $20 million. So that's the developer's perspective. The bank is going to say, we think the discount rate is 10%. We're only going to give you credit for the first 15 years, and that it's not going to be worth anything in year 16, so we only think it's going to be worth 9.8. Just to give you a sense for how the folks can have a different perspective on values. So that is one thing that the banks are going to look at, but they're also going to want to look at how much can this $13 million repay us. And banks always want margin. So and they usually want to be able to cover their interest and principal payment by 1.2 times. You'll hear that talked about as a debt service coverage. So in this example, if you have $1.3 million of cash flow, the bank is going to want their debt service to be no more than $1,083,000, so that the debt service coverage or the fixed charge coverage is 1.2. And sorry, I'm just gonna catch up a little bit with your comments. All right, so Wayne, you say under these assumptions, the developer needs $4 million. Yeah, we'll get to the final debt need. And Larry said the bank will only go as long as the PPA. In our case, yes, we'll only go as long as the PPA. We are seeing other banks go longer than the PPA. We're seeing banks go 20 years or longer. That's more of a kind of a function of our risk appetite. So I'll tell you, Fifth Third is most competitive in the construction space, in the construction lending, and that's part of the reason why is because there's other lenders who will do 20 years on a 15-year PPA. So just trying to get to like what the right permanent debt would be. So we want a loan that would service the debt service would be $1,083,000. I'll do a quick calculation on what that would be. Actually, we know what our payment is going to be. We want our present value. This is going to be the bank's interest rate of 6%, 15 years, payment is that. So, and we're running out of time, so I'm not walking you through every step of the math, but in this case, the bank would lend about $10 million, because that would equal a principal and interest payment of $1,083,000, and with cash flow of $1.3 million a year, they could cover that principal and interest payment 1.2 times. So that's how some banks would look at how to size this loan properly. Just to throw one other wrinkle in there is we're assuming there that the annual payment is fixed, meaning that if the total payment is fixed, that means that the interest and the principal are changing. Your total payment doesn't change, just like your mortgage, but your principal and interest changes. At Fifth Third Bank, because we are probably more conservative, we do principal plus interest. So that means the principal amount of repayment always stays the same. And so as your loan balance comes down, your interest payment is going to come down. So that means that your debt service is higher in years 1 and lower in year 15. So that, if we did that calculation, it would mean an even lower loan amount. But let's just stick with the $10 million number here. In this case, we would lend him $30 million of construction and $37 million of tax credit investment. So he needs to come up with another $13 million. But we'll only lend him $10 million on the permanent side So that's $30 million of construction loan, a $30 million construction loan, a $10 million permanent loan for $40 million. He needs 43, so he needs to go out and find $3 million of equity. Or he needs to find another bank who will lend him more money. Any questions on all that?
And is 90% usually what is being lent? Or do they usually go higher than 90%? Or do some banks go higher than 90%?
You know, I don't have the answer to that question because I don't see a lot of other banks doing the construction piece, but I wouldn't think they would go much higher than 90%. Because all of these, and the way that these tax credit equity investors work is the project gets built and then it's subject to like a final appraisal or whatever, and so the amount can actually change if the appraisal comes in lower, the amount of the tax credit equity. But it's just banks like cushion and a cushion for the unknown, and that's why they do 90%. But one of the points of this case is just to illustrate how permanent debt works, and that's been a big way that we've solved for the lack of state tax credit equity. So in almost all projects that we do now, we're willing to lend some portion against the federal tax credit equity investment and some portion as a permanent loan. And in a lot of cases, we might do that entire amount, and then the federal tax credit equity comes in, and then a new permanent lender comes in, and we're paid off. So I know we only have about 12 minutes, and I want to leave time for some questions and just some talk about kind of what's going on in the industry. But anybody have any other questions about that case or about permanent financing?
No, Jim, did you get to answer Wayne's question?
Let's see.
And Wayne, do you want me to give you the reins?
Yeah, and so what I solved for was that the developer would need to come up with about $3 million. But in this scenario, I would actually recommend that this developer go out and talk to a less conservative lender than Fifth Third Bank, a lender who would do 20 years against the 15-year PPA. Try to find somebody like that so they'd have to put in less equity. And so the developer would need to put in some money, but then maybe they could put in less if they found a different permanent lender. All right, we have 10 minutes, and what other questions do y'all have for me in terms of, what we're willing to do or what we're seeing in the industry?
Jim, are you still seeing some projects being done with tax credit equities? When was the last time you guys had that kind of a project?
Well, no, we still,
with state
all of our
tax
projects.
credits, sorry, with state tax credits.
Oh, no, we had, as you may know, there was kind of a race toward the end of the year to get certain projects grandfathered in order to qualify for the state investment. And so we had to get familiar with the requirements to be grandfathered, and I think there's a % construction test and maybe there's a dollar test, but we had a lot of projects meet those requirements, so they met those requirements in 2015, and so they were able to bring the state tax credit money in to help pay our loan down. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Oh, and Wayne is hooked on the value of agreements. I think Wayne just wants to sell those agreements now.
Yeah. I'd have to, Wayne, I'd have to go pull some data on how some sites have sold for, and we do some of the way that those products are valued, or some of it, or a big part of it's valuing those cash flows, like that little exercise that we did, and then we also know what products are selling for, which is generally we kind of keep a per megawatt number, and I'm just talking off the top of my head, but the number that comes to mind for me would be, I'd say, like 25 cents per kilowatt for a site that is fully developed. All the agreements are in place, the land is secured, and it needs to be just needs to be constructed. But that changes a lot. I have a little slide in here about yield codes. I don't know that much about yield codes, but I just put it in there to illustrate the fact that these are financial vehicles that the Wall Street banks created, and the idea was to buy a bunch of solar projects and then securitize them, sell off these big investments, and the owners of those securities could get long-term contractual cash flow from these PPAs. So we saw a period last year where the value of these projects were really driven up by the presence of the yield codes, and then that market took a little bit of a hit, and so we saw prices stabilize a little bit more, and then prices were also driven up a little bit by the potential expiration of the tax credit. But once that was extended, we saw a little bit more stabilization in prices. It also depends on who you're selling to. Most North Carolina is mostly in the Duke. Duke is the main utility, but there's some parts of North Carolina that are in Dominion territory, and there's some differences in the value of a Duke versus a Dominion contract.
Did you see Wayne's question about the 5 megawatt facility would command a premium of 1.25 million?
Yeah, that sounds right, Wayne, and don't quote me on that. I'd have to pull some recent information, see what some things have sold for, and there's always other factors involved, but yeah, there is a demand for those projects. Okay.
Great.
So what else? What else is on your mind? What other questions do y'all have?
How about these smaller systems that are under 5 megawatts? What's the likelihood of you guys being involved in it? Do you usually say, no, just go for your community bank? I mean, what's...
Yeah, it really depends. So a lot of what we've done in the past would be a developer who has 5 to 8 5-megawatt projects and they want to finance them all together. If somebody came to us with just one 5-megawatt project, it would be, it's something we would absolutely finance. The question is it a long-term customer that we want to invest in? So we probably don't want to just get into a relationship with somebody who's never done anything before, and this is probably going to be their only project. But if we believed in that developer and thought that it was going to be a long-term relationship and they were going to do more projects, then we would take a serious look at it. But depending on the dollar amount, in general, if you're dealing with a loan that's $3 million or less, you're probably going to get better terms with a community bank and probably get more attention from the community bank. And then, we have, we're probably ideal in that $3 to $80 million range. I know it's big, but then you'll have folks like Wells Fargo who they have their own renewable energy practice out in the West Coast, and they're helping finance major projects that would involve multiple banks.
Interesting. So you guys typically, unless it's with a long-term customer, you would stick with bigger projects, and so community solar or like
You've reached the voicemail box of
commercial solars. Oh, sorry. Oh no, Jim got cut off. Jim, are you still there? Nope, he got cut off. Ah. Hey Jim, I saw that you got.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. That's okay. We're almost at a close, but I wanted to ask about commercial solar because it seems like we have we know for a fact that North Carolina has a lot of growth in the solar farm scale of solar development, but commercial solar and residential solar haven't yet managed to it hasn't grown as much as other states.
Yep.
Is that a function of just the financing, and most banks don't want to have to deal with smaller loans?
When you say commercial solar,
Commercial, more like 2 megawatts on a commercial roof on a warehouse, for example, or
Yeah.
on like a big box.
yeah, I think that would probably be better suited for like a community bank. So, if it's on somebody's roof, you have some complications there with accessing the roof and stuff like that. So, those are which you can get around all those, but you're probably having you probably have a small developer who's dealing with a large tenant like a Home Depot, and I don't know, and then you would know better than I about the what do you call it, the net metering. I don't know how all that comes into play. And I'm no expert in the residential solar as well, but for residential solar to take off, in my opinion, I think you really need a comprehensive program that can be rolled out and easily implemented across multiple consumers. Something that's easily financeable, easily executable in terms of construction and management, because you're not, the money to be made there is based on volume, so you got to get a lot of them installed in order for it to make sense.
Right. Well, it's 1:30 and I don't want to keep you guys too long. And thank you so much, Jim, for staying and sticking up with us. For everyone who was here and stayed and hung on, thank you. Jim, as usual, he did a really great job kind of really going through this and talking through case studies, because these types of case studies really help us understand how we move forward in this industry. So thank you.
Well, good. Well, thank you, and good luck. And if y'all want to reach out to me with additional questions, you have my contact information.
Right. Thanks, everybody, and stay safe. I know the storms are coming, so good luck, guys, and have a good day. Be safe. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Jim. Bye.